My phone rang at exactly 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, interrupting my quiet dinner of leftover chicken and the evening news, and somehow I knew before I even looked at the screen that this call was going to ruin everything. "Hey, Mom." Brian's voice sounded strained, like he was reading from a script. "Do you think we could talk sometime soon? About, finances?" My name is Michelle Peters, and at 58, I thought I'd heard every possible variation of my son asking for money. But this felt different, more formal, more prepared. "Of course, honey. Is everything okay?" I muted the television and pushed my plate aside, my stomach suddenly tight. "Yeah, everything's fine. It's just Sarah thinks it would be good if we all sat down together. Tomorrow, maybe? If you're free?" Sarah thinks. Not, "we think," or "I was hoping." Sarah thinks. "Tomorrow works," I said, already dreading whatever presentation awaited me. "Should I bring anything?" No, just yourself. Around 7? The call lasted maybe 90 seconds, but something about his tone lingered after we hung up. Brian used to ramble when he was nervous, filling silence with childhood stories or random observations about his job. Now he sounded like he was checking items off a list. I arrived at their modest 2-bedroom house in the suburbs the next evening with a container of homemade brownies, because apparently I still believed baked goods could solve family tension. Brian, 27 and looking older every time I saw him, answered the door wearing khakis and a button-down shirt like he was headed to a job interview. "Thanks for coming, Mom." He hugged me briefly, but his shoulders felt rigid against my arms. Sarah appeared behind him in a burgundy dress that flattered her olive skin and dark hair, looking polished and purposeful. At 25, my daughter-in-law had mastered the art of appearing both vulnerable and completely in control. "Michelle, thank you so much for making time for us." Her smile was warm, but her dark eyes were calculating. "I hope you don't mind, but I put together a little presentation. I know how much you appreciate having all the facts." "A presentation? For a family discussion?" They led me to their small dining room where Sarah had set up her laptop next to a neat stack of papers. Brian sat across from me, fidgeting with his wedding ring and avoiding eye contact. Sarah launched into her speech before I'd even settled into my chair. "So, we've been reviewing our budget carefully, and with the baby coming and the mortgage rates increasing, we're finding ourselves in a bit of a tight spot." She clicked through slides showing their monthly expenses, all color-coded and professionally formatted. "We've talked to both our families, and everyone agrees that grandparents helping with housing costs is pretty standard these days. Both families." Everyone agrees. The language of consensus making me seem unreasonable if I didn't immediately comply. "We're looking at needing about $3,000 a month to stay comfortable," Sarah continued, her tone as casual as discussing the weather. "Just until Brian's next promotion comes through, of course. $3,000 every month?" I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was calculating. 36,000 a year, potentially for years, nearly half my annual income. And there's something else we wanted to share. Sarah's hand moved to her still flat stomach, her smile becoming softer and more maternal. "We're expecting? I'm about 8 weeks along now." Brian's face lit up for the first time all evening, a genuine smile breaking through his nervous expression. "We're really excited, Mom." "Congratulations." The word came out automatically, but my joy felt complicated by the timing. How convenient that this financial discussion coincided with pregnancy news. "Your husband always said this house should stay in the family for the grandchildren," Sarah said, her voice taking on a reverent tone. "Brian's told me how important family legacy was to his father." My breath caught. Those were David's exact words, spoken during one of our late-night conversations while he was dying. How family homes should anchor generations, how our sacrifices meant something if they created stability for our grandchildren. But hearing them from Sarah's mouth felt like sacrilege. Brian shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his jaw tightening when inheritance was mentioned. But he didn't speak up, didn't clarify or add anything to the conversation. He just sat there, letting his wife orchestrate the entire discussion. "This is a lot to process," I said finally. "I need some time to think." "Of course," Sarah said, already standing to clear the laptop. "We completely understand. Family financial decisions are important." As she walked me to the door, Brian lingered in the dining room, stacking the papers Sarah had left behind. Sarah's voice dropped to a more intimate tone. "You know, Michelle, Brian's been so stressed about money lately. He's been difficult at home." She sighed dramatically. "And I know you mean well, but calling him every day doesn't really help his anxiety. Maybe if we can get some stability, he can relax a little." "Every day?" "I didn't call him every day. Did I?" "I just worry about him," I said, feeling defensive. "I know you do, but sometimes the best way to help is to give him space to be a husband and father." Her smile was sympathetic, but her message was clear. Back off. The drive home felt endless. I replayed every moment of the conversation, analyzing Sarah's word choices and Brian's silence. $3,000 a month. A baby. My husband's sacred words about family legacy twisted into a guilt trip. I called my sister Madeline the moment I got home. They ambushed you, she said bluntly after I'd recounted the evening. PowerPoint slides? Who does that to family? But they are struggling, and I do have the money. Michelle, listen to yourself. You're being manipulated, but you're also trying to control your adult son's life. Both things can be true. That stung, but Madeline had never been one to soften hard truths. So what am I supposed to do? Watch them struggle? Ignore my grandchild's needs? You're supposed to let Brian make his own choices, even if they're mistakes. He's 27, not 17. Madeline paused, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. Look, if you really think something's off about this Sarah situation, my nephew David is good with computers and social media research. Kid can find anyone's digital footprint in about 10 minutes. But, Michelle, don't go down that rabbit hole unless you're prepared for what you might find. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and pulled out my phone, scrolling through months of texts from Brian. The change was obvious once I looked for it. Before his marriage, his messages were longer, more personal. Had the weirdest dream about Dad last night? Or tried that new restaurant you mentioned? You were right about the pasta. After the wedding, everything became shorter, more distant. Thanks for the birthday card. Sarah says hi. Can't make dinner Sunday, sorry. Always mentioning Sarah's perspective, her schedule, her opinions. When had my son's voice been replaced by his wife's echo? The next afternoon, I found myself parked across the street from their house. I wasn't planning to go in, just observing, making sure everything was okay. But as I sat there questioning my own sanity, Sarah emerged from the front door, phone pressed to her ear. She paced the driveway, gesturing animatedly, her whole body language relaxed and familiar. The tone wasn't professional, it was warm, intimate, and like talking to someone she knew well. Very well. I know, she laughed into the phone. You're so understanding about everything. Most people wouldn't be this flexible with the timeline. Timeline for what? Baby preparations? Financial planning? I craned my neck to hear more, but she was too far away. After a few more minutes, Sarah headed back inside, but something white fluttered to the ground where she'd been standing. Without really thinking, I got out of my car and walked over. It was a business card. Marcus Webb, Mortgage Solutions Specialist. The tagline read, Creative Financing for Unique Situations. I stared at the card, my mind racing. They already had a mortgage broker, the one who'd handled their original loan. Why would they need someone who specialized in creative financing? And why had Sarah's conversation sounded so personal, so intimate? Standing there in their driveway, holding evidence of what exactly? I realized I was about to cross a line. This wasn't casual concern anymore. This was investigation. This was the behavior of someone who didn't trust her own family. But as I looked at that business card, I told myself I wasn't being paranoid. I was being protective. Someone had to look out for Brian, especially if he was too overwhelmed or manipulated to see clearly himself. I slipped the card into my purse and walked back to my car, already planning how I'd research this Marcus Webb character, because sometimes protecting the people you love means doing things that feel uncomfortable, even when those things make you question who you're becoming. I started researching Marcus Webb that very night. His website looked professional enough, clean design, legitimate testimonials, proper licensing credentials displayed prominently, but his specialty list made my stomach twist. High-risk refinancing, creative financing solutions, second chance mortgages for unique situations, the kind of language that basically screamed, we work with people banks won't touch. So why did Sarah need someone who specialized in helping people with bad credit? Brian's credit was decent when he bought the house, and Sarah worked, even if it was only part-time. Unless something had changed. Unless they were in deeper trouble than they'd admitted. I spent 2 hours reading through his client reviews and case studies, looking for red flags. But honestly, he seemed legitimate. Just specialized in helping people who couldn't get traditional loans. People with debt problems, self-employment income, recent bankruptcies. I felt ridiculous. Here I was, at midnight, researching mortgage brokers like some kind of paranoid conspiracy theorist. But I couldn't shake the memory of Sarah's voice on that phone call, so warm and familiar, so intimate. 3 days later, I realized Brian's birthday was coming up. Perfect excuse for an unannounced visit. I spent an hour at the department store, settling on a ridiculously expensive chef's knife set that Brian had mentioned wanting months ago. $240 for knives seemed insane, but I wanted to show up as the generous mother, not the suspicious one snooping around their finances. I called from their driveway. "Surprise, I'm outside with birthday presents." "Mom?" Brian sounded confused. "I thought you were coming Saturday. Change of plans. Can I come in?" Sarah appeared at the door beside him, her expression carefully neutral. "Michelle, what a lovely surprise. We were just finishing dinner." "I brought birthday gifts," I said, holding up the shopping bag like a peace offering. Their dining room still smelled like takeout Chinese, and Sarah quickly cleared the containers while Brian opened his presents. His face lit up when he saw the knives, and for a moment he looked like my little boy again instead of this careful, distant version of himself. "These are incredible, Mom. Thank you." He hugged me properly for the first time in months. "I've been thinking about our conversation," I said, settling into a chair. "The financial help you mentioned. Maybe we could go over the details again?" Sarah's posture stiffened slightly, but her voice stayed pleasant. "Of course, though we don't want to burden you with all the boring specifics. I'd actually like to understand the full picture," I pressed. "Your mortgage payment, monthly expenses, Brian's salary projections, just so I know exactly how much help you need and for how long." Brian shifted in his chair. "Well, the mortgage is about $1,800 a month, plus utilities and insurance. And we've got some credit card debt that's gotten a little out of hand." "How much credit card debt?" I asked directly. "About $12,000, Brian said quietly, and Sarah shot him a sharp look. "It's actually closer to 15, Sarah corrected smoothly. "Medical bills from my prenatal care, plus we had that roof repair last month. Unexpected expenses, you know how it is." But I'd been doing math in my head and something wasn't adding up. Brian made $52,000 a year, Sarah maybe 18 part-time. Even with their modest lifestyle, building up $15,000 in debt didn't make sense unless there was spending I wasn't seeing. "The thing is, Mom," Brian started, running his hand through his hair, "it's actually worse than we initially thought. I didn't realize how much we'd been using credit cards for basic expenses and—" "Brian," Sarah's voice was gentle but firm, "we don't need to overwhelm your mother with every detail." But I'd seen his frustrated expression when she cut him off. My son wanted to tell me something, and his wife was managing the conversation. Sarah's phone rang then, and she glanced at the screen with a small smile. "I should take this. It's probably about insurance coverage. I'll just be a minute." She stepped outside, and through the kitchen window I could see her pacing the driveway, phone pressed to her ear. Her whole body language was relaxed, animated, the same intimate tone I'd witnessed before. "I really appreciate the options we discussed," I heard her say as she passed closer to the window. "You're being so understanding about everything." Options they discussed. Not coverage options or payment options. Just options. When she came back inside, I tried a different approach. "You know, I've gotten pretty good at budgeting over the years. Maybe I could help you organize your expenses, see where we can trim things." Sarah's face went carefully blank. "That's sweet of you to offer, Michelle, but we're adults. We can handle our own finances. We just need some temporary help with the mortgage while I'm pregnant and not able to work full-time." The shift in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. Polite but firm. "Back off. Speaking of the pregnancy," Sarah continued, her voice brightening artificially, "we should start planning the baby shower soon. I'm almost 4 months along now, so we'll want to have it in the next couple months." 4 months. That was news to me. Hadn't she said 8 weeks just 2 months ago? The timing seemed about right, but I realized I'd been losing track of how quickly the pregnancy was progressing. Dinner ended with an uncomfortable undercurrent of tension that everyone pretended not to notice. As I gathered my purse and keys, Brian walked me to my car. "Thanks for the knives, Mom, and for, considering helping us out." He looked exhausted, more than exhausted, overwhelmed. "Brian, is everything okay? You seem stressed." He started to say something, then stopped. "It's just a lot. The baby, the money situation. Work's been crazy busy lately. I've been pulling 60-hour weeks." 60 hours? That's a lot. "Yeah, well," he shrugged. She's been pulling away from family stuff lately, making excuses not to come to dinners or gatherings. Says she needs space to focus on the pregnancy." I saw my opening. "Honey, sometimes when people are isolating you from family, it's not about what's best for you." His jaw tightened. "She's not isolating me, Mom. She's pregnant and stressed, and honestly, you've never really given her a fair chance. You still treat me like I'm 12 years old." The words hit like a slap. "That's not true." "It is, though. You call every day, you show up unannounced, you want to manage our budget. Sarah's right that we need some boundaries." Sarah's right. Everything came back to what Sarah thought, what Sarah needed, what Sarah decided. But his accusation stung because part of it was true. I did call frequently. I had shown up unannounced tonight. I was trying to manage their finances. The drive home felt endless. I replayed every conversation, every expression, every moment of tension. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd made a decision. I was going to find out what was really going on. The next morning, I called Sarah's mother under the pretense of baby shower planning. I'd gotten her number from Brian months ago for some family gathering. "Oh, Michelle." Her voice was warm and grateful. "I'm so glad you called. I've been meaning to thank you." "Thank me?" "For the financial help you're giving the kids. Sarah told me how generous you're being with the mortgage assistance. It's such a relief, honestly. Our family can't contribute much, but knowing they have your support makes such a difference." My blood went cold. "Sarah told you I was helping with their mortgage?" "Well, yes. She mentioned you'd worked out the monthly payments and how wonderful it was that Brian's grandchild would benefit from the family inheritance eventually. She's so excited about building generational wealth for the baby." Inheritance. Family inheritance. Sarah had told her mother the money was already agreed upon, and that inheritance was part of the plan. "When did she tell you this?" I asked carefully. "Oh, last week sometime. She called to discuss baby shower invitations and mentioned how grateful she was that everything was falling into place financially. Said it was such a blessing that family takes care of family." I hung up feeling sick. Sarah had told both families that my help was a done deal. She'd framed it as generational planning, inheritance expectations, family obligation. If I refused now, I'd look cruel and petty to everyone who'd already been told I was helping. But if I agreed, I'd be rewarding manipulation, enabling someone who'd orchestrated this entire situation while I'd been stumbling around trying to figure out what was wrong. I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone, feeling the trap closing around me. Either way I chose, Sarah won. I picked up my phone and called Brian back within 10 minutes, because sometimes the only way out of a trap is to walk straight into it with your eyes wide open. "Hi, Mom." His voice was cautious, like he wasn't sure which version of his mother he was getting. "I've been thinking about your request," I said, skipping past pleasantries. "I'm willing to help with the monthly payments." The relief in his voice was immediate and painful. "Really?" "Mom, that's incredible. Sarah's going to be so relieved." "Of course she is. But I have some conditions." Silence on his end. Then, carefully, "What kind of conditions?" "Monthly budget reports. I want to see exactly where the money is going. And regular family dinners. Once a month, at your place. If I'm going to be this involved in your finances, I want to stay involved in your lives." "Mom, that's—" He paused, and I could practically hear him calculating how to present this to Sarah. "Let me talk to Sarah about the reporting thing. The dinners sound great, though." "Talk to Sarah. Always talk to Sarah first." "Brian, this isn't a negotiation. These are my terms for a very generous gift. $3,000 a month requires some accountability." Another pause. "You're right. Of course. I'll set up the spreadsheets tonight." We scheduled the first dinner for the following Friday, and I spent the week wondering if I was being reasonable or just setting myself up for more manipulation. But at least I'd have a front row seat to watch Sarah work her magic. Friday evening arrived with that crisp October air that makes everything feel like a beginning or an ending. I showed up at their door with a bottle of wine and my best poker face, ready to see how Sarah would handle having to actually account for money she considered already hers. "Michelle." Sarah greeted me with a hug that felt perfectly warm and perfectly calculated. "I can't tell you how grateful we are. This takes such a weight off our shoulders." She looked genuinely happy, which should have been my first warning sign. Someone who'd just been asked to provide financial transparency shouldn't look quite that pleased about it. Brian appeared behind her, and for the first time in months, he looked relaxed. Really relaxed. The kind of relief that comes from having impossible burdens lifted. My heart twisted watching him, because this was what I'd wanted. To see my son breathing easily again. "Hope you're hungry," he said, giving me a proper hug. "Sarah made that beef stew you always compliment her on." We settled around their small dining table, and I waited for the awkward moment when I'd have to ask about the budget reports. But Sarah beat me to it. "So I brought those financial documents you wanted to see," she said brightly, pulling out a manila folder from the sideboard. "I actually really appreciate you asking for this level of detail. It made me organize everything better." She handed me 3 perfectly organized spreadsheets, color-coded and categorized. Mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, medical expenses, credit card minimums, car insurance, gas, even a line item for baby preparation expenses at exactly $67.32. I scanned the numbers, looking for red flags, for evidence of frivolous spending or financial irresponsibility. But everything looked legitimate, boring even. Groceries at reasonable amounts, utilities that matched typical usage, medical bills with insurance copays clearly noted. "This is very thorough," I said, flipping through the pages. And it was, almost suspiciously thorough. "I've always been good with budgets," Sarah said, serving the stew. "My mom taught me to track every penny when I was in high school. Poor families have to be organized about money." The slight emphasis on poor families wasn't lost on me, a gentle reminder of her humble background, positioning my skepticism as elitist suspicion. "And this credit card debt," I continued, pointing to the $15,000 balance. "What exactly accumulated here?" Brian shifted uncomfortably, but Sarah answered smoothly. "Medical bills from early pregnancy complications, that emergency roof repair I mentioned, and honestly, we've been using credit for groceries more than we should. When Brian was working those crazy overtime hours, we were ordering takeout too much instead of cooking." All perfectly reasonable explanations, all completely impossible to verify without invading their privacy further than I already was. "Well," I said, setting the papers aside, "everything looks in order." Sarah smiled, but there was something victorious in her expression, like she'd just passed a test she'd been preparing for. The conversation moved to safer topics: Brian's work projects, Sarah's pregnancy symptoms, plans for the baby's room. I found myself actually enjoying dinner for the first time in months. Maybe I'd been overthinking everything. Maybe Sarah really was just a young woman trying to build a stable life for her family. Then Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. Not the polite smile she'd been giving me all evening, but something warmer, more intimate. She typed a quick response, still smiling. "Sorry," she said, putting the phone face down on the table. "My mortgage broker has been so helpful with some refinancing options. He's really understanding about our situation." Something about the way she said understanding made my stomach tighten, but Brian didn't seem to notice anything unusual. Her phone buzzed again. Another small smile as she read the message. "He's just confirming some paperwork for Monday," she explained, but she was typing another response, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. Buzz, smile, type. "Wow, he's very responsive for a Friday evening," I said carefully. Sarah looked up, and for just a second I saw something flicker across her face. Calculation. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual warmth. "Marcus has been incredible to work with. He really goes above and beyond for his clients. We feel so lucky to have found someone who understands that young families need creative solutions." Marcus. Not our broker or the mortgage specialist. Marcus. The phone buzzed again. This time Sarah just glanced at it and left it alone, but I caught the edge of her smile. "Speaking of financial planning," Sarah said, setting her fork down and looking directly at me, "there's something else we've been hoping to discuss with you." Here it comes, I thought. Since we're all being so open about finances now, and with the baby coming, Brian and I have been wondering about your long-term estate planning. Brian looked up from his stew, clearly surprised this was coming up now. "Estate planning?" I repeated. "Well, yes. I know this might be awkward to discuss, but with us starting a family, we want to make sure everyone's on the same page about the family's financial future." Sarah's voice was gentle, reasonable. "Your husband always talked about keeping the house in the family for the grandchildren, and we just want to understand how that fits into your overall plans." My breath caught. Those words again, David's exact words, spoken during our most private conversations about legacy and family continuity. "I'm not really ready to discuss estate planning with anyone," I said carefully. "Of course, and we totally understand that," Sarah continued, her voice getting more earnest. "It's just that with the baby coming, we're trying to think about long-term stability. Maybe we should all sit down with a financial planner together, just to make sure the family assets are structured in a way that benefits everyone, especially the grandchildren." The grandchildren. Singular, actually, since there was only one on the way. But she'd made it plural, making it sound like an established pattern rather than a hypothetical future. "We're not asking for anything," Brian added quickly, shooting his wife a look I couldn't quite read. "We just want to understand the bigger picture." "Actually," Sarah said, leaning forward slightly, "it might be smart to review everything now before the baby comes and life gets crazy. Your husband mentioned the house specifically, right? About keeping it in the family?" She was pressing. Gently, sweetly, but definitely pressing. "He said a lot of things," I replied, my voice cooler than I'd intended. Sarah's phone buzzed again. She ignored it this time, but I noticed her fingers twitch toward it. "Of course he did," she said softly. "I just think he'd want to make sure his grandchild benefited from the generational wealth he worked so hard to build." Generational wealth. Like we were the Kennedys instead of a middle-class family with a paid-off house and some retirement savings. The table went quiet for a moment. Brian was staring at his plate, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of conversation. Sarah was waiting for my response with that patient, understanding expression that was starting to feel less genuine and more strategic. I think we should focus on month-to-month support for now, I said finally. Estate planning is a conversation for another time. Absolutely, Sarah agreed, but I caught the flash of frustration before she composed herself. I just wanted to put it on your radar. Her phone buzzed again. This time she picked it up immediately. Sorry, this might be important, she said, standing up. I'll just be a second. She stepped outside onto their small back deck, phone pressed to her ear. Through the sliding glass door I could see her pacing, her whole body language animated and relaxed. Not the stiff professionalism you'd expect from a business call on a Friday night. Sarah's been really stressed about our finances, Brian said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. I think having your support is just making her feel more optimistic about everything. But I was watching his wife through the glass, noting how she kept smiling while she talked, how she gestured expressively like she was talking to someone she knew well, someone she was comfortable with. When Sarah came back inside, her cheeks were slightly flushed and she looked energized. Everything okay? I asked. Oh yes, just coordinating some appointments for next week. Marcus has some new options he wants to go over with us. Marcus again. And appointments. Plural. He works late hours, I observed. He's very dedicated, Sarah replied, settling back into her chair. And honestly, he's been so understanding about our situation. Most brokers would have written us off, but he really listens and comes up with creative solutions. The way she said understanding again, with that same warm tone, made something click into place. This wasn't professional admiration. This was something else entirely. The rest of dinner passed in increasingly strained conversation. Sarah kept checking her phone, smiling at messages, and making casual references to her broker's helpfulness and flexibility. Each mention felt more intimate than professional, more personal than business. When I got home that night, I couldn't shake the image of Sarah's face when she talked about Marcus. The same expression she had had when she first told me about the pregnancy, like she had a secret that made her feel powerful. 3 days later, Brian called. Hey, Mom, I've been thinking about our dinner arrangement, he said, his voice careful and formal again. Maybe the monthly dinners are a bit much. Sarah thinks it might be better if we just kept things simple. You could transfer the money directly to our account each month, and we'll send you the budget reports electronically. Sarah thinks. Always back to what Sarah thinks. I enjoyed having dinner with you both, I said. I thought it went well. It did. It's just, Sarah feels like having formal check-ins every month creates a weird power dynamic, like we're being monitored instead of helped. Brian, it's $3,000 a month. Some accountability seems reasonable. I know, and we appreciate that. But maybe we could just handle it more privately? Without the face-to-face meetings? Without my ability to observe? Without my chance to ask questions or notice things like mysterious phone calls and intimate conversations with mortgage brokers? Is that what you want or what Sarah wants? I asked directly. Long pause. It's what we both want, Mom. We need some boundaries around this arrangement. Boundaries. Sarah's favorite word for cutting me out while keeping my money flowing in. I need to think about it, I said. Okay, just try to understand that we're grateful, but we also need to feel like adults in this relationship. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. Every time I tried to maintain connection with my son, Sarah found a way to redirect the relationship back to distance and financial transaction. But this time, something was different. This time, I'd seen her face when she talked about Marcus. I'd watched her check her phone with those secretive smiles. I'd listened to her press me about inheritance and estate planning while maintaining the facade of just wanting family security. For the first time since this whole situation started, I didn't feel confused or outmaneuvered. I felt angry. 2 days later, I drove to their house unannounced. I told myself I just wanted to see Brian, to talk to him without Sarah managing the conversation. But when I pulled into their driveway, only Sarah's car was there. She answered the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, looking surprised but not displeased to see me. Michelle, what a nice surprise. Brian's at work, but come in, come in. I followed her into their living room, noting how relaxed she seemed without Brian there to observe our interaction. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. I lied smoothly. How are you feeling? The pregnancy going well? Oh, wonderful. I'm almost into my second trimester now, so the nausea is finally easing up. She settled onto the couch across from me, looking perfectly at ease. Can I get you anything? Tea? Water? I'm fine, thank you. I studied her face, looking for any sign of discomfort about our last conversation. I've been thinking about what Brian said, about simplifying our arrangement. Oh, good, she said, leaning forward slightly. I was hoping you'd understand. It's nothing personal, you know. We just want to make sure we maintain healthy boundaries as a family. Healthy boundaries? The phrase rolled off her tongue like she'd practiced it. Of course. I want what's best for everyone. I paused, watching her expression. Though I have to admit, I've been a little concerned about you lately. Her smile faltered slightly. Concerned? About what? You seem stressed. At dinner the other night, you were checking your phone constantly, dealing with work calls. That can't be good for the baby. Sarah's laugh was light, but I caught the wariness in her eyes. Oh, that wasn't work. That was just my mortgage broker. He's been so helpful with our refinancing options, and he's very responsive about answering questions. Very responsive, I agreed. Even on Friday evenings. Well, yes. Marcus is very dedicated to his clients. He understands that young families need flexible communication. There it was again. That warmth in her voice when she said his name. That's wonderful. It's so important to have professional relationships built on trust and understanding. Exactly. Sarah was nodding, but something in my tone had made her posture slightly more defensive. He's been incredibly supportive during this whole process. I'm sure he has. I smiled, letting the conversation hang in the air for a moment. You know, Sarah, I want you to know that I notice things. I've always been observant about people and situations. Her smile became more fixed. Of course you are. That's just being a caring mother-in-law. And a caring mother-in-law notices when someone she loves seems to be keeping secrets. The room went very quiet. Sarah's hands moved to her lap, and she was no longer quite meeting my eyes. I'm not sure what you mean, she said carefully. I think you do. I leaned back in my chair, maintaining my pleasant expression. I think you're much more aware of what's happening around you than you let on. And I think you know exactly what kind of game we've been playing. Sarah was silent for a long moment, and when she looked up, something had shifted in her expression. The warm, slightly vulnerable daughter-in-law was gone, replaced by someone much more calculating. Michelle, she said softly, I think maybe you're the one who's stressed lately. This whole situation has been hard on everyone, and sometimes when people are feeling overwhelmed, they start seeing problems where there aren't any. The words were gentle, but the message was crystal clear. I was being unstable. Paranoid, creating drama where none existed. You might be right, I said pleasantly. Sometimes I do worry too much. Sarah relaxed slightly, thinking she'd successfully redirected the conversation. Of course you do. You love Brian and you want to protect him. That's natural. Her voice took on that therapeutic tone again. But sometimes the best way to protect someone is to give them space to handle their own problems. Space? I repeated, like not having monthly dinners to check in. Exactly. Not that we don't want to see you, she added quickly, but formal arrangements can create tension. Better to keep things natural and comfortable for everyone. Natural and comfortable. Code 4, send money but don't ask. Questions. I appreciate your perspective, I said, standing up. I should let you get back to your day. Sarah walked me to the door, her polite mask firmly back in place. Thank you so much for understanding, Michelle. I know Brian will be relieved that we're all on the same page about boundaries. As I reached for the door handle, I turned back to her. You know, Sarah, I've really underestimated you from the beginning. She looked pleased, taking it as a compliment. Oh, well, thank you. Yes, I continued. I thought you were just a young woman trying to figure out marriage and finances. But you're much more strategic than that, aren't you? Her smile became more cautious. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you know exactly what you're doing. Every conversation, every request, every boundary you set up. It's all very carefully planned. We stared at each other for a moment, and I saw her weighing how to respond. Finally, she chose her words very deliberately. Michelle, I think it's important for everyone in this family to respect each other's autonomy and decision-making. Brian and I are grateful for your support, but we also need to feel trusted to manage our own lives. The subtext was clear. Back off or lose access entirely. Of course, I said. Trust is so important in families. I walked to my car feeling the weight of what had just happened. Sarah knew that I knew, and I knew that she knew that I knew. The polite pretenses were officially over. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw her standing in the doorway, phone already pressed to her ear, probably calling Marcus to debrief about my unexpected visit. I realized I'd completely underestimated my daughter-in-law, who'd been orchestrating every interaction while appearing innocent and grateful. That realization hit me like a freight train carrying a load of pure rage. I sat in my car outside their house for another 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Sarah had played me from day one. Every sweet smile, every grateful comment, every manipulation disguised as family planning, it was all calculated. And I'd been stumbling around like some confused old lady while she orchestrated my son's entire life. Well, that shit was ending right now. The first thing I did when I got home was call Brian. Straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Voicemail. By the third attempt, I wasn't even surprised. "Hi, honey, it's Mom. Call me back when you get a chance. We need to talk about the monthly payments." Short and sweet. No dramatic declarations, no emotional manipulation. Just information. He didn't call back that night, or the next day, or the day after that. By day 4, I was leaving daily messages that got progressively more direct. "Brian, I've decided to stop the monthly payments effective immediately. I won't be financially manipulated, and I think you know exactly what I mean. Call me." Nothing. 3 weeks in, Madeline showed up at my door with takeout Chinese, and that look she gets when she's about to tell me something I don't want to hear. "You need to apologize to that boy and let this go," she said, setting containers on my kitchen table like she was conducting an intervention. "Whatever Sarah did or didn't do, you're punishing Brian for his wife's behavior." "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm setting boundaries. Michelle, you're cutting off contact with your only child over what amounts to family drama. Sarah's manipulative? So what? Half the women in America are manipulative about money. You think that makes Brian deserving of losing his mother?" The worst part was that some tiny voice in my head agreed with her, but a much louder voice was screaming that something was genuinely wrong here, and everyone was telling me to ignore it. 3 weeks, Madeline? He hasn't returned a single call in 3 weeks. Does that sound like normal behavior to you? It sounds like a man caught between his wife and his mother trying to keep peace in his marriage. By completely cutting off his family? She set down her chopsticks and gave me that level stare that meant business. By protecting himself from whatever war you two are fighting. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about family boundaries or marriage dynamics. This felt like something else entirely, something deliberate and planned. After Madeline left, I did something I'm not proud of. I opened my laptop and searched for Sarah's social media profiles. Her Instagram was public because of course it was. Sarah wasn't the type to miss opportunities for attention and validation. I scrolled through months of posts looking for, what exactly? Evidence of financial irresponsibility, proof of manipulation, signs that she was living beyond their means? What I found was worse. Photos from restaurants I knew cost $60 per person. Date nights at wine bars that charged $15 per glass. A shopping trip to Target where she'd tagged herself buying nursery essentials that looked expensive and completely unnecessary for a baby that wouldn't arrive for months. All posted within the last month. All tagged with locations around town. All funded by money they supposedly didn't have. But it was the pregnancy updates that really caught my attention. 20 weeks and feeling great. Baby is the size of a banana now. 20 weeks. I grabbed a calendar and started counting backwards from the date of her post. If she was 20 weeks along now, that meant she got pregnant in June. But she'd announced the pregnancy to me in September, claiming to be 8 weeks along. 8 weeks in September meant she got pregnant in July. The math didn't work. She was claiming to be a month further along than her own timeline suggested. I screenshot that post and kept scrolling. Baby shower planning. So grateful for family support during this special time. Blessed mind family. Our generational wealth. Generational wealth. The hashtag made my stomach turn. But it was the location tags that really made my blood run cold. Cafe Luna, tagged with Marcus Webb, mortgage solutions specialist. Riverside Wine Bar, tagged with Marcus Webb, who'd commented, "Great seeing you today. Looking forward to our next meeting." Miller's Steakhouse, photo of Sarah looking dressed up and happy, with a comment from Marcus. "Hope you enjoyed celebrating. You deserve all the good things coming your way." A heart emoji from her mortgage broker on a photo of her at a restaurant that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. I clicked on Marcus Webb's profile. Public, naturally. Real estate professional, fitness enthusiast, recently divorced. And there, scattered throughout his posts over the past 3 months, were comments from Sarah that read nothing like professional correspondence. You always know exactly what to say. Thanks for being so understanding about everything. Not everyone would be this flexible with our timeline. Looking forward to seeing you soon. Timeline. There was that word again. I spent 2 hours going through their digital interaction history, screenshotting everything that looked remotely inappropriate. By the time I finished, I had 17 images that painted a very clear picture of a relationship that had moved far beyond mortgage consultation. But the most damning evidence came from a reverse image search on one of Sarah's recent photos. She'd posted a picture of herself at what appeared to be a business lunch, captioned, "Discussing financing options. So grateful for professional guidance during this important time." The reverse search showed the same photo on Marcus Webb's Facebook page, posted 3 hours earlier with the caption, "Lunch with my favorite client. Some meetings are definitely more enjoyable than others. Favorite client," with a heart eyes emoji. I sat back in my chair feeling that familiar tightness in my chest, but this time it wasn't confusion or hurt. It was pure crystalline anger, because I finally understood what I was looking at. Sarah wasn't just spending money they didn't have. She was spending money while maintaining an inappropriate relationship with the person supposedly helping them solve their financial problems. She'd manipulated the pregnancy timeline to create urgency around inheritance planning, and she'd isolated my son from his family while positioning herself as the victim of an unreasonable mother-in-law. This wasn't desperation or poor judgment. This was calculated long-term planning. The next morning I drove past their house. I told myself I was just checking to see if Brian's car was there, making sure he was okay after 3 weeks of radio silence. But when I parked down the street and walked along the sidewalk, I could hear Sarah's voice through their open front window. "No, I understand. The timeline concerns, but we need to be strategic about this," she was saying, her tone sharp and businesslike. "The estate situation is more complicated than we initially thought, and keeping the mother-in-law under control is proving more difficult than expected." I stopped walking. Estate situation. Mother-in-law under control. The pregnancy timeline helps create urgency, but she's being more resistant than we planned. Sarah continued, "We might need to adjust our approach or consider alternative strategies for accessing the assets." Alternative strategies for accessing the assets. I stood there on the public sidewalk, listening to my daughter-in-law discuss my dead husband's legacy like it was a business acquisition, and something inside me went ice cold. I walked quickly back to my car, my hands shaking as I started the engine. When I got home, I went straight to my computer and started researching everything I could find about Marcus Webb and Sarah's financial history. What I discovered was a rejected mortgage application from 6 weeks ago, filed under both their names but with income figures that were clearly inflated. Brian's salary was listed as $65,000 instead of $52,000. Sarah's part-time income was listed as $35,000 annually, which would require her to be making over $17 per hour at a dental receptionist job. They'd tried to refinance their house using falsified income information, and when that failed, they'd turn to the monthly payment plan with me. But Marcus Webb's involvement suggested this went deeper than a simple loan application. His business specialized in creative financing solutions for people who couldn't qualify for traditional mortgages, people with bad credit, irregular income, or other financial problems that required flexibility. I spent the entire afternoon piecing together a timeline that made my stomach churn. First, Sarah and Brian had gotten into serious debt, the $15,000 they'd admitted to, but probably more. Then they'd tried to refinance their house using falsified information to get cash out of their equity. When that failed, they'd needed another solution. Enter Marcus Webb, creative financing specialist, who'd somehow convinced Sarah that the answer was long-term financial support from family members, specifically from me. But the pregnancy announcement, the inheritance discussions, the careful timing of everything, that wasn't desperate scrambling. That was strategic planning. And the flirtatious relationship with Marcus, that was either the cause or the result of extended collaboration on this financial scheme. I sat in my kitchen as the sun set, surrounded by printed screenshots and browser histories and phone records that painted a picture I'd never wanted to see. My daughter-in-law had been orchestrating a long-term plan to access my estate through manufactured urgency around her pregnancy and their mortgage crisis. She'd established an inappropriate personal relationship with someone who specialized in helping people manipulate financial systems, and she'd successfully isolated my son from his family while positioning herself as the victim of an unreasonable mother-in-law. The pregnancy timeline manipulation was just another layer of the same strategy, making the baby seem more real and imminent to create emotional pressure around inheritance planning. I felt vindicated. Finally, I had evidence that my instincts had been right all along, but I also felt disgusted with myself, because what I'd done to get this evidence, the social media stalking, the drive-bys, the eavesdropping, made me feel like someone I didn't recognize. I'd become the suspicious mother-in-law Sarah had always painted me as. Paranoid, intrusive, obsessive. But the difference was, I'd been right. I poured myself a glass of wine and spread all the evidence out on my dining room table. Screenshots of inappropriate social media interactions, photos of expensive dinners they couldn't afford, timeline inconsistencies in pregnancy announcements, records of failed mortgage applications with falsified income, and underneath it all, the sound of my daughter-in-law's voice discussing estate timelines and keeping me under control. For 3 weeks, I'd been questioning my own sanity, wondering if I was seeing problems where none existed. Everyone had told me to let it go, to apologize, to respect boundaries. But my son had been systematically deceived by someone who viewed him as a pathway to financial security, and she'd been so good at it that even I had doubted myself until tonight. I wasn't going to doubt myself anymore. I opened my laptop and started planning my confrontation, fully aware that I was crossing into morally questionable territory. But sometimes protecting the people you love means doing things that make you question who you're becoming, even when the person you're becoming is someone you're not entirely sure you like. The text came on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks into the worst silence of my life. Hey, Mom. Sarah and I would love to have you over for a barbecue this Saturday. Her parents are in town and we thought it would be nice for everyone to meet. 2 p.m. at their house. Hope you can make it. I stared at the message for a full minute, my coffee going cold in my hands. After 3 weeks of ignored calls and complete radio silence, suddenly I was invited to a family barbecue. How convenient. But I knew exactly what this was. Their mounting debts had finally caught up with them, and Sarah had realized they actually needed my financial support more than they needed to keep me at arm's length. I texted back immediately. I'd love to come. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. Looking forward to seeing you. Just myself. Like I was some harmless grandmother showing up with potato salad instead of someone who'd spent 3 weeks gathering evidence of his wife's systematic deception. I spent Friday afternoon shopping for the perfect gift, a $300 baby carrier that the sales associate assured me was top of the line and exactly what modern parents want. Expensive enough to demonstrate my generosity, practical enough to show I was thinking about their actual needs. But mostly, it was bait. Saturday arrived with that crisp November air that made everything feel sharp and clear. I pulled into their driveway at exactly 2 p.m., my printed evidence folder tucked discreetly in my purse alongside the cheerful baby gift. Sarah answered the door looking radiant in a flowing blue dress that showed off her growing belly. Her smile was warm and genuine, like the past month of tension had never happened. Michelle, you look wonderful. Come in, come in. My parents are so excited to meet you. She hugged me with what felt like real affection, and for a split second I almost felt bad about what I was planning. Almost. Brian appeared behind her, looking relieved and slightly nervous. Thanks for coming, Mom. I've missed you. The words hit harder than I'd expected. My son's face was thinner than I remembered, stressed in a way that made my chest tighten, but when he hugged me, I felt some of that old closeness we used to share. I brought something for the baby, I said, handing over the elegant gift bag. Sarah's eyes lit up as she pulled out the carrier. Oh my goodness, this is beautiful and so practical. We were just looking at these online. Of course they were, probably adding it to the wish list they couldn't afford. I want to make sure you have everything you need, I said warmly. Family takes care of family. Brian's expression softened and Sarah actually teared up a little. Perfect. Let them get comfortable. Sarah's parents were exactly what I'd expected. Jeffrey Clark looked like a man who'd worked with his hands his whole life, wearing pressed khakis and a button-down that probably came out for special occasions. Linda Clark had Sarah's heart-shaped face, but with gray-streaked brown hair and worried eyes that suggested years of financial stress. Mrs. Peters, Jeffrey said, standing to shake my hand with a firm grip. Sarah's told us so much about you. We really appreciate how you've been supporting the kids. Supporting them? Past tense, like it was already a done deal. Please call me Michelle, and it's my pleasure. Brian's happiness is the most important thing to me. We settled on their back deck with glasses of iced tea, the autumn sun filtering through the trees in a way that should have felt peaceful. Sarah bustled around serving cheese and crackers, playing the perfect hostess while Brian worked the grill. You have a lovely home, Linda said, looking around their small yard. Sarah mentioned you might be helping them find something bigger once the baby comes. I smiled pleasantly. We've discussed some possibilities. It's so important to have space for children to grow, Jeffrey added. We never had much when Sarah was little, but we made it work. Still, if you can give the next generation more opportunities, that's a blessing. Family values, generational thinking. They were as invested in this narrative as Sarah was. I absolutely agree, I said. I believe strongly in honesty and trust between family members. Those are the real foundations of generational wealth. Sarah glanced up from arranging crackers, something flickering across her face, but Jeffrey was nodding approvingly. Exactly right. Too many families these days don't communicate properly. Secrets and dishonesty tear families apart. They certainly do, I agreed, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. I've always taught Brian that marriage requires complete transparency, no hidden agendas. Sarah's smile stayed perfectly in place, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Linda leaned forward. Sarah mentioned that Brian's father had some wonderful ideas about keeping family assets together for the grandchildren. What a thoughtful man he must have been. He was, I said quietly. David always said the house should stay in the family for the grandchildren someday. He believed in building something lasting. How beautiful, Linda sighed. Modern families move around so much. It's nice when there's a family foundation to build on. Brian came over with a plate of grilled chicken, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. Sarah was glowing, Jeffrey was talking about the importance of family roots, and Linda was already planning where a nursery might go in a bigger house. Everyone was so comfortable, so happy about the bright future that seemed to be falling into place. Perfect. This is wonderful, I said, raising my glass of iced tea. I'm so glad we're all together like this. Actually, I have some wonderful news to share. All conversation stopped. 4 pairs of eyes focused on me expectantly. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few weeks. I continued, my voice warm and excited. And I've decided not only to resume the monthly payments, but I'd also like to help with a down payment on a bigger house. Since the baby's coming, you'll need more space. Sarah's face lit up like Christmas morning. Michelle, that's incredible. Really, Mom? Brian's voice was thick with relief and gratitude. Are you sure? Absolutely. I've been doing some research to help you better, and I've learned some very interesting things. I reached into my purse and pulled out my folder, setting it calmly on the patio table. I discovered some things about your mortgage situation that I think everyone should know about. The temperature on the deck seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah's expression went carefully neutral, but I saw her hands clench in her lap. What kind of things? Jeffrey asked, his voice taking on the cautious tone of a man who dealt with plenty of financial bad news. I opened the folder and pulled out the first set of printed screenshots. Location tags, flirtatious comment exchanges, social media interactions that went far beyond professional communication. I've discovered that Sarah has been having an inappropriate relationship with your mortgage broker, Marcus Webb. The silence was deafening. Brian's fork clattered against his plate. These are screenshots of their social media interactions over the past 3 months, I said, spreading them out like playing cards. Location tags showing them at restaurants together. Comments that are clearly personal rather than professional. Heart emojis from a mortgage broker. Brian stared at the papers, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that was starting to look like growing anger. What the hell is this? He said quietly. Sarah? Jeffrey's voice was sharp. What is she talking about? Sarah's composure cracked. This is... Brian, she's been spying on us. Going through our private social media, taking screenshots. This is exactly the controlling behavior I've been trying to protect you from. Protect me from what? Brian's voice was getting louder. Protect me from what, Sarah? From her manipulating our relationship, Sarah shot back, but her voice was shaking. Marcus may have misread some professional interactions, but any personal communication was his idea. I was just trying to secure our loan. His idea? I said pleasantly, pulling out another screenshot. This is you commenting on his fitness photos with kiss emojis, Sarah. Last Tuesday. Linda Clark's face had gone pale. Sarah? Honey? What's going on? But I wasn't done. There's more. I overheard Sarah on the phone discussing estate timelines and keeping me under control while you two were planning how to access what she called the assets. Brian stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the deck. What the fuck is she talking about, Sarah? Brian, language. Jeffrey warned automatically, but his attention was fixed on his daughter. And then there's the pregnancy timeline, I continued, my voice still maddeningly calm. Sarah's been telling everyone different dates about when she got pregnant, plus your rejected mortgage application with falsified income information. I pulled out the final documents. Brian's salary is listed as $65,000 instead of $52,000. Sarah's part-time income is listed as $35,000 annually, which would mean she's making over $17 an hour as a dental receptionist. Jeffrey's construction worker hands were clenched into fists. Sarah Michelle Clark, you explain yourself right now. I can explain the mortgage thing, Sarah said desperately, tears starting to flow. We were desperate, and Marcus said sometimes you have to be creative with income projections. It's not like we were trying to commit fraud. Marcus said, Brian repeated, his voice shaking. Marcus seems to have a lot of fucking opinions about our life. Is any of this true? He asked, looking directly at his wife. Sarah broke down completely. Brian, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. Your mother has been so controlling, investigating us, making me feel like I had to handle everything myself. Yes, I got close to Marcus, but only because I felt so isolated and desperate. Got close to him? Brian's voice cracked. What does that mean? It means she's been having an affair, I said quietly. It's not an affair, Sarah screamed. It was just emotional support, someone who understood what I was going through. Brian was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. You lied about the mortgage application. You've been, whatever this is, with some other guy. What else, Sarah? What else have you been lying about? Linda Clark was crying now, her hands covering her face. Jeffrey looked like he wanted to disappear into the deck boards. I handed Brian the folder containing all the evidence. It's all there. The social media interactions, the timeline inconsistencies, the falsified documents, everything. Sarah's parents exchanged a look and Jeffrey cleared his throat. Sarah, I think you need to come inside and explain yourself. Privately. Mom, Sarah started, but Linda was already standing up, her face a mask of disappointment. Inside. Now. As Sarah's parents led her toward the house, she turned back to Brian. I need you to understand. Everything I did was because I love you. I love our family. I was trying to build something stable for us. Brian was still staring at the evidence folder, his hands trembling as he flipped through page after page of screenshots and documents. I need time, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I need time to process this, all of it. Time for what? Sarah asked desperately. Time apart, Brian said, still not looking at her. I can't even look at you right now. Sarah's face twisted with pure hatred as she turned to me. Are you happy now? Is destroying my marriage worth it? Was this worth ruining your relationship with your son? I looked at Brian's devastated face, at the wreckage of his relationship scattered across their patio table, at Sarah's parents disappearing into the house with their heads hung in shame. For a brief moment I felt the weight of what I'd done, who I'd become, the calculating woman who'd spent weeks gathering evidence and planning this public humiliation. But then Sarah tried one last manipulation. Everything I did was out of love, she said, her voice breaking. I was trying to protect our family's future, and now you're hurting your own grandchild with this vindictiveness. I looked at her calmly. Sarah, falsifying mortgage documents and maintaining inappropriate relationships while manipulating inheritance discussions isn't love. It's calculated deception designed to extract maximum financial benefit from both families. The deck fell silent except for the sound of muffled voices. From inside the house, where Sarah's disappointed parents were quietly confronting their daughter about the scope of her deceptions, Brian sat alone on the porch steps looking completely broken, the evidence folder clutched in his hands like it might somehow make sense of the devastation around him. And I felt the cold satisfaction of complete victory alongside the knowledge that I'd burned part of myself to achieve it.